everyone to type in their questions if they come across some doubts, and we'll take those questions later on at the end of the session one by one. So let's start with the first part, that is introduction to test automation. Now, why do we need test automation in our company? Test automation is something which provides us a platform in which we can execute our test case, existing set of regression test cases in a very short duration. The use of software and some programming. So, for example, if you consider this particular user registration example, a manual user registration would take much more amount of time rather than a data-driven user registration via a particular test automation software, which can be done in few seconds. How can you apply your test automation in software lifecycle? See, test automation can start right from the point of designing of your test case. You can very well determine the feasibility of your test automation from the design phase itself. Now, as soon as your manual test cases are designed, you start your test automation. Even though you don't have the build available for testing your UI automation, but then you can very well start creating your test cases, and then later on run those existing automation test cases against the application that is given. So automation starts from the design phase itself. We can start creating unit automation test cases from the start, and if we start doing this kind of activity, that is, test activity kind of approach, wherein our test-driven methodology is determining the behavior of the software.
Guys, your voice is not coming clear. It is coming very low.
Okay.
We are unable to hear you.
Okay, let me. Hello. Is it? Am I audible now?
Yes, sir. Now it's clear.
Okay.
Now it's clear.
So I would request others to be on mute, please. So the question once again arises: why do we need test automation? First important point that why do we need test automation is to increase the test coverage. Now, the more we automate, the lesser the time the manual team is going to take to go through the existing set of functional test cases. Now, before the automation started earlier, it used to be like 50 or 60% of the total coverage. Now, as the advancement in the various automation tools have come up, now we can achieve almost 90 to 95% of automation in the existing set of test cases. So, to increase the test coverage, automation is extremely necessary, and it is the need of every company now, because they would like to have the functional testing done rather through automation, and the manual testing is more of an exploratory testing rather than going through the same set of regression testing. When you do automation, it is a kind of stressing the application, running parallel scripts, and the application is stressed upon by various means. So some of the defects which you cannot find out while doing the manual testing can be exposed. For example, if the user doesn't have a proper internet connection, there can be different kind of behavior displayed by the application. So such kind of non-functional defects can only be, found out through test automation. I would request if people would be on mute and not sharing their screen. Would request them not to share a video because that would save the bandwidth funds. Another important point is automation reduces the time taken for regression testing. The amount of time that user can take to go through the entire set of test cases. Let's say we have about 500 functional test cases and we have a team of manual testers. So it would rather take two or 3 days to go through the entire functional test cases. But through automation, we can achieve this in 3 or 4 hours. So such kind of significant time saving can be achieved through test automation. That is why we strongly advocate that we go for test automation and do our continuous integration. Next part is introduction to test automation framework. Now, why do we need test automation framework? We've already seen. Now, let us get some small amount of introduction to test automation. So, test automation framework is actually a set of guidelines that every user working in a particular project has to follow. If there are 10 you say coders in your project and everyone is designing his or her code in his own way, there is no fixed set of guidelines. What he would be doing is doing the coding on his own part, and it will be very difficult to merge the particular test cases or the functions that have been created by those coders in your team. So if we follow some fixed set of guidelines in creation of test cases as well as writing of the functions and following some standard coding practices, that would in turn help us to merge the code properly. This particular testing framework is actually responsible for defining the format in which to express expectations. Also, understanding in creating a mechanism how to design our test cases. It is very important that we follow a standard approach while creating a test automation test case. If we have a fixed set of guidelines in which we have to create our test cases, it becomes easier for others also to follow this. Okay, let's go to the test framework types. So, in all, we have overall 4 different kind of automation frameworks available in the market as of now. When it comes to waterfall model, the first one is modular test automation framework. Second is data-driven framework. Third is keyword-driven framework, and fourth is hybrid framework. When we talk about the first one, which is modular test framework, this is basically creating reusable set of code or functions which can then later be used for calling in the test scripts that we create. The modularity of this testing framework is built on concept of abstraction. That means we are creating set of reusable independent functions which can be called in different test case scenarios. Now, every application has some specific functionality which can be used in specific test cases. So instead of writing those set of steps again and again, what we do is we write those steps at one place and call those functions again and again if they have to be reused. That is why it builds an abstraction layer for the component to hide the rest of the application, and the changes made to those reusable functions will not affect the entire set of test cases. Let us consider an example for modular testing.
I'm not hearing anything. Can you speak?
Hello?
The voice
Hello?
is not coming.
Hello?
Yeah, now it's okay.
Actually, I'm not able to hear your voice as well.
At the same time, your voice also not clear, but you are speaking audible, but your voice is stuck somewhat.
Okay. Are you able to hear the voice clearly right now?
Yeah, I'm fine now.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. So modular test framework, as I was thinking about, is basically creating reusable components which can be later called into various test cases. Instead of creating the same set of steps for every test case, what we can do is create a set of steps once and later calling them into different test cases. You can say that modular test framework can also be called as a part of page objects model, wherein we create the interaction with the pages in the form of functions, and we call those pages in every test cases to maintain the flow. Hello, is my voice audible to everyone? Hello?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. Again, a small request. If someone is sharing their video, please stop sharing their video, please. That would help in saving the bandwidth for the session. The voice would be much more better audible. So if someone is sharing their video, please stop sharing. So let us now discuss the advantage of modular test framework. As I said, modular division of scripts leading to easier maintenance, and we can scale the framework anytime because there are reusable independent components. The functionality available is easy to use test library, so creating new scripts for different test cases is easy and fast because each and every component is independent of the other. So calling reusable function is very easy. Only disadvantage of modular test framework is that test data has to be embedded in them. So when we need test data, we have to, you know, call those test data in that particular test case. Okay. So as per your request, let me go to the introductory slide once again. I hope my voice is audible to each and every user right now. Not audible? Okay. So modular test framework is basically a framework wherein we have to create reusable components or functions. For example, if you consider the scenario for login, what we would be doing is we would be creating steps for sending the username, password, as well as clicking on login button. Now this particular step can be created once and can be reused in different login scenarios. For example, if I'm testing a positive scenario, the same set of steps for setting the username, password, and clicking on login button can be used. Even if I am testing a negative scenario, I will be still using the same set of steps, of course, with different parameters. If I'm testing a valid scenario, I will be passing in the valid username and password. If I'm testing a negative scenario, I'll be passing in the invalid username and password. So when you use the same set of steps, it becomes easier for everyone, to get a particular result. That is all about modular test framework, wherein we create set of reusable components which can be used in different scenarios. So if we discuss the advantages of modular test framework, we already seen that it is easier to maintain because we have a set of reusable independent components. Also, the scalability is very easier to maintain because we can easily add new components since other existing components are independent of each other. The only disadvantage is that test data needs to be embedded in each and every test case. There is no separate object repository maintained for adding the test data. For this purpose, what we do is we create data-driven testing frameworks. Okay. Let me just check what is the connectivity issue because I don't see some problem from my end.
Excuse me, I have a doubt regarding model testing framework.
Hello? Are you able to hear me clearly now? Hello?
Yes,
it's
Ravi,
clear.
we can hear you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes?
Yeah.
Yes, you
I have
good.
disabled the updates also in my machine, so it doesn't take the necessary bandwidth. I hope now my voice is clear to you.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, thank you. So let's move on to the second type of test framework, that is data-driven test framework. Now, data-driven test framework is a framework wherein We determine the test input and expected output results in a particular object repository. For example, we can have an Excel sheet wherein we define what test data we need for running a particular scenario. For example, user registration, wherein we have a set of username, password, contact number, email ID for registering the user, and we use that set of data for registering multiple users for the same scenarios. So data driven testing is all about testing a single scenario with different set of test data so that we can understand what is the behavior of the application with different amount of data. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you so much. What happens is, as you see in the diagram that is depicted in the PPT, the driver scripts contains navigation through the program, which helps in reading the data files and logging of test status information. And this test framework helps the other team to organize their suite and in turn help improve the efficiency of testing. Now, the main thing that we should understand in a data driven testing is we have scenarios in which we would like to register or we would like to execute the same scenario with different set of test data and understand what is the behavior of the application. That is what is data driven kind of testing. I request the other people to be on mute, please. So if we see the example of a data driven framework, as I said, if you consider the registration of user for Gmail, then you can see the URL for that user registration, username and password that we would be using, as well as some other details that we'd be using for the registration scenario. So the same scenario would be executed for different users. That is what is data driven testing. Let us understand the advantages of this kind of test framework. Okay. So the first advantage is that this kind of framework reduces the overall test scripts needed to implement all the test cases because we are executing different scenarios with different set of test
Hello?
cases. Yes,
Yeah, Ravi, I have a question on this. You are saying in the advantages that less amount of code is required to generate all the test cases.
yes,
So, can you explain that very clearly so that we get to know? Yeah.
yes. Suppose we have scenarios. In, suppose we have a scenario in which we have to test this registrations. Sorry,
Yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
I can see some background noises. Okay. So suppose we have a scenario in which we would like to register different users, for example, admin, or we have a normal user as well as we have, say, a privileged user. So we would not go ahead and create different set of steps for those kind of user, and then we would be using the test data for different user registration, and we'll be going ahead with the same set of steps. Just the validation part would be different because we'll be validating for different users using the same steps. Hello? Did that answer your question?
Yeah, hello, I got that.
Then the third part is test data can be created before test implementation. As I said, if we have some scenarios in which we can, predict the test outcome, even if we don't have the available applications, what will happen is we can implement the test data driven kind of approach, wherein the outcome of our application is already decided and it is clear to both developer as well as the stakeholders. Only kind of disadvantage that I see in this is every time there is a new scenario for which we have to execute for different set of test data, we have to go on adding those in the driver script. So that uh, actually, kind of introduces a good amount of maintenance. So for that purpose, what we do is we go for keyword driven testing framework. So if we observe keyword driven testing, sorry?
Yeah, I have doubt in disadvantage. Please to explain me again.
Okay.
Yes, sure.
Yeah. The disadvantage says that test cases created are similar and creating new kind of test scripts requires new scripts to understand different data. See, if you understand this particular example, if I add one more column into this particular part, for example, I add one more parameter which needs to be added in that test case, I have to go ahead and make changes in the code once again. I
Okay.
cannot use the same set of code for running this particular test case because I would not be, then incorporating that change. So it
Yeah,
is
I got.
kind of, yeah, so it is kind of inflexible when
Right.
it comes to this data driven part. So we actually go for this keyword driven part as a solution.
Hello.
Yes.
What is the difference between the modular and the data-driven one? Because I feel the code is written for modular, and you just call the function. But for data-driven also, you are doing the same thing. The code is written, and you are just giving in different data. So it's the same, right?
See, for modular, we have reusable set of functions as well. For data driven, it might not be the case. It is test case specific, right? The data is test case specific, but in case of modular, it is the steps that you call in a test case is reusable.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes. Please go ahead.
Yeah. I have a doubt. Means just what does it mean that the keyword-driven testing is how exactly it is done?
Yeah, we'll discuss this keyword driven testing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ravi,
Yes.
can you explain about disadvantages because I'm not getting exactly.
Yeah.
Because
See, let me discuss this. Yeah, let me go through this once again. If I take this particular example in case of data driven, what would happen is if I happen to add one more particular column into this, my user registration scenario is like this, and I happen to add one more parameter in this so that I can add some more detail while registering the user. The existing set of test case which I was using for registering a user will now not be usable because I cannot scale it for the added parameter. So I have to make changes in that particular test case. So it becomes kind of slightly, inflexible, and again we have to make changes to that particular test case whenever we have new things to be added in that particular scenario. That is the disadvantage of data-driven framework.
You're saying if we add anything, any column, any new column in Excel sheet, it
Yes.
will be in disadvantage. Added
Yes,
parameter.
because yes,
Okay.
that is an added parameter, and we have to make the change in the existing set of test cases.
Okay. Thanks.
Yes. When it comes to modular frameworks, we actually, make changes in the reusable functions rather than making change in the test cases. So we are actually, not touching up the test cases part. We are only making a change in the reusable function part. So the same test case code can be rerun with the added component. We'll see what is. Yeah, please go ahead.
In modular test framework, we are passing the data in code itself. It's like hard
Yes.
code.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thanks.
So we are not dealing with the test data Excel sheets in modular framework, is it so?
Sorry, your voice is not audible.
If we are passing hard-coded data into the application,
Yes.
so we are not concerned with the
we are not
Excel
maintaining a
sheets.
repository. No, we are not using a repository kind wherein there is test data for that particular test case.
Okay,
Hard-coded.
but
Yes. So the
One more
third,
question, Ravi.
yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, so you said in data-driven method we have actual output as well as expected output, right? So actual output is when we send the data to the server and get the output, right?
Yes.
Okay, fine. So do we track all of this in the Excel sheet and then compare both of them to verify whether the result is same?
See, we do kind of assertions in our automation test cases wherein we have some expected results in
Yeah,
the
because
assertion.
because I have been working on automation recently, so I have started like I am working on Excel sheet. Okay,
Okay.
so
So
we
you are
have this,
passing the test data from the Excel sheet?
yeah.
Yeah.
But what we have done is we have this data in Excel sheet, okay, and we are getting the expected output using the visual script design and sorry for the noise. Okay, so we have VB scripting for that is macros are set up to get the expected output, and the actual
Okay.
output is basically when we send the data to the server and we fetch the actual output, we put it into Excel sheet. Okay, so after that we have this comparison method. So is that what the data driven framework looks like? I just wanted to know the
Uh,
comparison.
See, if you want to understand, as I explained, data-driven is actually all about testing a particular scenario against
Yeah.
different set of test data. So, data-driven
Mhm.
can be, it is, if you understand, no framework is actually very specific. The framework is designed as per the requirement of the application. So, when we talk about data-driven, even in that, what we can have is different kind of approaches when we create the thing. So expected
Okay.
versus actual part can also be incorporated in it. But if you talk in the ground sense, we do the assertion part for very less expected results because we already know what kind of test data we would be passing and the expected result for that test case is already there in the test case.
So the expected result would basically be the manual assumption you are saying,
Yes.
manual efforts you are saying, right? Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
you can go ahead.
yeah. So I would request others to be on mute, please. So the third kind of automation test framework is keyword-driven framework. Now, keyword-driven testing is application-independent framework which utilizes data tables and self-explanatory keywords. Now, if we understand this, let us break the test cases into specific steps. For example, if I talk about login, what would login include is send keys for username, then again send keys for password, and then click on login button. So we can break the login scenario into 3 specific actions, that is send keys for username, send keys for password, and click on login button. So we can define this particular set of actions somewhere, either in an Excel sheet or a properties file if we are using Java, and we can call these actions in our test cases so that we can execute any kind of script. That is what is keyword driven framework. If I show an example of this, you can see you have to concentrate on the action part that you see on the screen. As you can see, they have defined a specific action that is set for passing in the username. Again, a set action for passing in the password value, and click action for login that I already explained for login scenario. So what happens in this kind of test case? We are defining a particular set of action for each test case. And we are actually making it slightly modular because we are breaking them into a particular set of defined actions. Now the only part as I see in this is if we want to verify something which is slightly complex, it becomes slightly inflexible for us as well in this also, because all the verification steps cannot be incorporated into the keyword driven test framework as well. So it is slightly inflexible from that part when it comes to verification. Otherwise, using keyword driven test framework is very modular because we can break down our existing set of test case into specific actions, and we can also pass the data, and we can incorporate that data driven approach in this keyword driven framework. So in that manner the advantage comes in. So if we go to the disadvantage section, it is difficult to, as I explained, to scale your keyword driven test case, because if we have an end-to-end test case and we would like to incorporate and define it into a specific set of actions, we would rather fall short of some validation part because we would not be able to incorporate that. So in that case, or in that sense, we would not be able to properly utilize the keyword driven framework. So scalability is an issue when it comes to keyword driven framework. So if you would like to incorporate all the weaknesses and mitigate these issues, we can have a hybrid kind of framework wherein we incorporate all the advantages of the above 3 mentioned test driven framework scenarios. So the last part of test framework is hybrid framework, wherein we incorporate the advantages of all 3 kind of test frameworks. So hybrid test framework, as you see, is basically a combination of advantages of the other existing kind of framework, wherein we can go for both data driven and keyword driven approach, as well as we can have the modular test framework approach as well. For example, we can incorporate page objects model and go for reusability of test scripts. Hello? Yeah. Any questions? Oh. So hybrid framework is basically a framework which is used in most of the projects. No project can be specifically called that they are actually using data driven or keyword driven approach. It is always hybrid, wherein they are using some reusable components which can be called in every test case, as well as they can have a set of test data which can be passed from a repository, and they can also divide their test cases into specific actions. So always any automation project is basically more or less a hybrid kind of thing. Now, if you understand the working of a hybrid framework, this example can be understood as a hybrid example, wherein if you see this is an example where we are simulating a calculator action. As you see, this calculator is divided into two modes. One is standard mode and second is scientific mode. But then in both of these modes, what we would do is we would call the same specific actions. In case of scientific mode, we have new added actions as well. For example, log, sine, and cos, which we would not be using in standard mode. But the execution of the test cases is done by the same set of driver scripts and reusable components. If we compare all of the existing frameworks, if we go for modular testing framework approach, we have reusable components. If we go for data driven, the maintainability is slightly better. And if we go for hybrid framework, then it integrates the advantage of all other frameworks. So as I said, every project in turn has their own hybrid framework. No project can say that they are purely using a data-driven approach. If I can I request the others to be on mute and not share their video, please. Please be on mute. So that is all about test automation framework introduction. Now, before we move ahead, we can have some question and answers. So if people have more doubts over the test framework, then they can go ahead and ask.
Can you explain the keyword method in brief again?
Keyword in brief, yes. See,
Yeah.
keyword-driven approach is basically breaking down your test case into specific set of keywords. For example, if we are doing a registration kind of stuff, for example, we have a user registration, so we can divide it into specific set of keywords. For example, we have to pass username, password, confirm password, and email ID. So we can divide this into send keys action for username, password, confirm password, and mobile number. So one action would be used to pass in different data. That is send keys. And then we can have a click action, which would be registering the user. So keyword driven approach is in that case.
Okay, send keys. Okay, fine. Got it.
You can define your own actions into it. For example, as I displayed on the screen, the example used. Sorry.
Yeah, and this action should comprise of the steps, right?
Yes, those action would actually be steps. As you can see the screen, these actions are accompanied by some specific data as well.
Value.
Yes.
Okay.
Hello.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So if we talk about modular framework and data-driven framework, so is there any object repository difference in between these two? Because in data-driven, we have a separate object repository placed in our framework, and we need to refer that to find the locators and store various other components of the application.
See, if you are talking about the different object repository along with data driven, then it is a hybrid kind of framework. It is not pure data driven.
Okay, so in modular we don't have an object repository. We
No,
just simply
we
hard code
actually
the
don't
value
have.
into the.
Yeah, we actually pass those values directly into test case.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi Ravi, I have one doubt.
Yeah, please go ahead.
In our framework, let's suppose we have a hybrid framework. We will have around 2000, more than 2000 test scripts. Now in test cycle, I want to run 100 test cases. How I'll achieve this?
Can you please come again?
I have one hybrid framework.
Okay.
And that framework, I have 2000 or more than 2000 test scripts.
Okay.
Now in my testing cycle, I want to run only 200 test scripts. How I will achieve this?
See, there are many ways in order to achieve this kind of stuff. For example, you can go for creating groups for your existing set of test cases. So every time you create your test case, you group it or you add a particular category to your test case. So if I want to run a specific set of 200 test cases for, let's say, sanity, which would not include the regression and the functional ones. So once I create a category for each of those 200 test cases, I would be running those specific ones. These can be done easily either using a TestNG framework for test execution, or you can also go for JUnit categories. So it depends how you are grouping your test cases while execution.
Hello, I have another doubt.
Yeah, please.
I have actually around, suppose you have 20 modules.
Lot of noise behind the screen.
Please give a minute.
I request others to be on mute.
Yeah. Suppose we have 20 modules, and these 20 modules have another execution script of 20 different Excel sheets. If I want to execute them overnightly, and what only you can say I want to run 10 of those, but in one go. So is there any way to execute all of them rather than running one by one? Because
Yes.
these 10 have different scripts for them.
See, you can divide your scripts into batches and execute them. As I said, TestNG framework can be used for organizing your test cases and basically dividing them into different threads and running them at any time. Let's say we have 200 different test cases and I would like to break them into batches of 5. Let's say 40 per batch. So I can very well break those test cases into 5 batches and execute them in parallel. What would happen is when I'm doing this, actually I'm saving some kind of time as well, because one thread would be executing only 40 test cases, and if you have more than one machine to execute these test cases, let's say we have 2 or 3 VMs, then it becomes even more easier for us.
Okay, and suppose if I want to get my results updated into the manual test cases, then what would be the scenario?
See, we have integration plugins available for Quality Center, or nowadays it is called as ALM. That is available,
ALM,
as well as we have plugins available for Jira as well. So we can directly update the execution results into these applications.
Okay, thank you.
And if you go for continuous integration type, then it becomes even more easier if you are using something like Bamboo. So your test cases which are imported directly from Jira can be directly updated that they have been executed in that particular cycle. So if we are using something like Jira, then it is much more easier for us if we are also using Bamboo for executing our execution. Any more questions? Hello? Any more questions
No.
you have before we move ahead? We are approaching the end of today's session. Okay.
Hi, Ravi.
Yeah, please.
I want to ask one thing that in my framework, how many XML file, test.ng XML file I can introduce? Means there may be possibility that I have to run sanity, I have to run regression, I have to run smoke. So how many XML file I can introduce?
See, it depends how you want to break your test cases. For me, I can have one XML file for each of these categories, as well as I can have a single XML file wherein I can have test blocks for these categories. So what you can do is inside every if I go for a single XML file, I would do is I would create test blocks and add groups for each of these categories. For example, I have a test inside which I add a group for sanity. Then I have another test block in which I have a group for smoke, and I have another test block in which I have added a group for regression. So every test block can be, then run in parallel or sequentially as per the requirement of the project.
Hi Ravi, I have one question.
Yeah,
Uh,
please go
by
ahead.
by using this frameworks, we can create test scripts only for web application, or we can create
The
scripts for.
a framework is actually for basically setting standards for creating anything. It can be all framework is also for creating web application. So framework can be
From me.
used for organizing the way we code and develop an application or build some script. So it can be used for automation as well, for application development as well.
Okay, can I use these frameworks for creating scripts for some protocols like RIP, OSPF, routing protocols?
Yes, why not? We can go ahead. See, basically, a framework is, defining some standard set of steps which can be reused for different scenarios. So if you have created some standard functions which can be used for basically reading these protocols and finding the responses, you can use the framework for that scenario as
Okay, thank you.
well. Yes. Any more questions? You can ask questions related to your framework as well.
Ravi,
Yes.
if I have a framework and it is kept in SVN, now
Okay.
in future I have to add more scripts and anything else, then I have to
Okay.
pull all the framework from SVN, or I can add, like how I'll work on that.
See, if your framework is kept in SVN and you don't have the uh, copy of that framework in your machine, then what you can do is you can check out that particular framework once in your machine, and then when you update some files, what you can do is take an update from the SVN repository and commit your code. That is how we approach when we work with SVN.
But
Every
I
time,
have to check from my end also. Like I have made
yes,
any changes, then I have.
every time you make a change, it is expected that you first take an update from the repository and then commit your code. So that whenever you make a change, you are not, basically working on a different version. Can I request other participants to be on mute, please? Hello?
Yes, Ravi.
Yeah. So as I explained to you, when we work with SVN, what happens is first we have to update our local working copy every time we start making a change. So only after you take an update, you are expected to start making a change and then basically update and commit your code. So that is what is the expected way of working with SVN. First of all, you should always take an update from repository for any other changes made to it by any other user and then basically make, commit your code if you
Yeah,
have
but
made any change.
after my changes, I have to check my from my end. How I will check means if I am going to run it, it will run whole the framework, right?
You once see you have could have made some changes to specific parts of framework, but others have not made any changes to it as of yet. So when you commit your code after taking an update, the updated framework is then available for others also to make changes on after the recent changes has been made.
No, no,
That is
Ravi. This is not my question. My question is that before committing my changes, I have to check from my end.
before committing your changes.
Yeah,
See,
yeah.
when you make some changes to the files, there is always an indicator. If you are working if you are working with SVN, there is a tool called as Tortoise SVN. Are you using any specific client for working with SVN?
No, no, actually, I'm not working, but I have. I want to ask that after making any
Yeah, yeah,
changes, yeah,
yes.
I got.
That's what I said. That's what I said. If you are using a client, for example, Tortoise SVN, whenever you make a change to the file, that modified file is highlighted in your framework. So
Yeah,
you
yeah, I
come
got
across.
that. I got that. But my question is, like, I made if something wrong in that my scripts, whatever I have modified, it is not correct. Then I should not commit it, right? If I'm making any changes, it will show me that the changes will be there and I can commit. But my question is that I made some changes. I want to check my from my end. Then only I can commit, right?
Yes. So if you know that you have done something incorrect, then every time you before you commit your code, you always have to execute your code, right? Before
That's
you
what my
commit it.
question. That's what my question. If I am going to execute, it will execute whole framework or what will execute? How will I achieve this?
See, you make some changes in specific part, so you have to execute that part of framework before committing in the code. So that has to be done from your end itself. It cannot be checked on SVN.
Okay, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Hello. Hi, Ravi.
yeah, please go ahead.
Can you explain me modular testing in short? Actually, I joined the meeting in middle. That's why I don't have an
Okay.
idea about it.
See, modular testing approach is basically creating a reusable set of functions or steps which can be used in every test case. So we will be having some reusable functions which can be called into every test case. For example, I can talk about page objects. So if we are uh, creating page objects and the interactions on those pages into functions, then those page objects can be, called into different test cases as per the interaction of the user with the page in that application.
Just like a unit testing, yeah,
Yes.
for particular testing. And which approach we have? Suppose we have one project for the mobile app testing. So which
Sorry,
approach we have
your
to?
voice is slightly low.
Yeah, yeah. Suppose we have a one mobile app testing project.
Okay.
In the beginning, from the beginning. So which approach we have to follow about the framework? Means so first, is it compulsory for testing model framework, model testing framework, then data driven testing and keyword driven
No,
and
no, no.
hybrid?
See, any project that you take up, basically that project more or less has a hybrid kind of approach wherein we have the good advantages of all kind of framework incorporated into our framework. So we actually end up having a hybrid kind of framework rather than the
Mm.
specific.
Because my company follow the first keyword-driven testing framework, and then
Yes, if
after,
they,
yeah.
yeah, if they are, even if they are following a keyword-driven kind of approach, you have to then break down your existing set of test cases into specific keywords.
Yes, 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 yes.
Yes.
And then
So,
now we are starting for the data-driven testing framework actually.
okay.
So is
So,
it not dependency? No? First we have to follow the modular
no,
testing,
no,
then
no.
data.
There is no dependency. You have to decide what is the right kind of approach for your particular project. Because if it is a simple project, okay, if it is a simple
Okay.
project, not too many complex scenarios, you can easily go for keyword driven approach because then the assertion part and validation part is easier. If it is a complex kind of application wherein we have to, basically go for validation of multiple things, in that case, keyword driven is not advised because then we cannot validate those complex expected results.
Okay, okay. And can you explain me hybrid testing framework in short? Just little.
Hybrid framework is basically, framework in which we incorporate good practices from the existing set of frameworks.
Okay.
So it would incorporate reusable components from modular framework as well as data-driven approach
Means it's a combination of
of
data-driven and
all three years.
okay,
You can say
okay.
at least
With
it will be a
integration.
combination. Sorry, it will be a combination of at least modular and data-driven or modular and keyword-driven. So combination of at least two of the above three.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Ravi.
So any more questions related to your framework?
Yeah, hi Ravi. What is the limitation on the number of Excel sheets that can be used in data-driven testing framework?
See, if we are talking about data driven, there is actually no limitation, but then the time required to read each and every Excel sheet would be significant if we are talking about execution of test cases and loading that data into at runtime from those Excel sheets at runtime. So if we have more number of Excel sheets, the time taken for test execution would be higher. That's all. There is no limitation on the number of Excel sheets that we can use.
So it will also depend on the data that is being used, right? Like
Yes,
if I'm using more data, then the time would be more.
yes, yeah. So if let's say we have 20 or 30 columns for the test cases, it is natural that we would be, taking more time because we have to load that much amount of data before running the test case.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So any more questions? Okay, then let's move ahead. So final two slides actually talk about shift of focus from the earlier waterfall model to agile. If we have, as we have seen the above test case PPT slides, we incorporate those kind of framework more to waterfall model rather than agile. If we talk about agile, agile is all about, working in short sprint cycles wherein there would be changes, testing and development happening in each and every cycle rather than in a specific period. So if we are incorporating any specific kind of framework for agile methodology, then it would not work satisfactorily for us. So there is a shift from these traditional automation frameworks to BDD. If we are using BDD, let me give you a small introduction about this behavior driven development. It basically uses something called as Gherkin language to create test cases. Now these test cases are created in the form of specific keywords. So those keywords are defined by Gherkin language. We have a specific tool called as Cucumber. If anyone has come across BDD, they would know that there is a specific tool called as Cucumber or JBehave, and there are two or three more different BDD tools which can be used to create user stories. Now, these user stories define the behavior of the application, and all of the stakeholders and as well as the developers and testers are on the same page. When we talk about BDD, it is defining the behavior of the application beforehand and then developing the application. And thus it gives a clear understanding of what the system should do to both the developers as well as the stakeholders. And it makes the testing process more efficient. So overall summary for our today's session is the test framework should be application independent. Whenever we start designing a particular test framework, what we should understand is there has to be a framework which is not specific for your application. It should be more application independent. It is not created only for your specific application. It should be designed in such a way that if there comes a new application for your project, you should be able to automate that application as well. The test framework must be easy to expand, maintain, and perpetuate. So as I explained, if there comes a need wherein there are new added features in your application or there is a new application which has to be automated, the framework should be scalable and maintainable. Third point is hybrid testing combines the advantage of all other frameworks. As we have seen, it combines the best practices of all other frameworks, for example, data-driven, keyword-driven, or modular framework. The last point is, as I explained, in agile projects nowadays, we are usually going for BDD kind of approach, wherein we'll be creating user stories using Gherkin language, and we would be then doing the application development and testing based on those user stories. So before we wrap up our today's session, let me show you a small example of a modular framework. So this is basically a Maven project in which I've created few components. So sample of modular framework as well as data-driven framework. As you can see, it has 5 important components that you can have in any kind of automation framework. First is the configuration part, which would store configuration details for your applications. So if I see this particular property, it shows the configuration details for user login. Then we have the modular part, which is page objects. As you can see, every page has the locator as well as the reusable function, which can be used for creating test cases. Then the third part in the application is utilities. Now this particular section is independent of any application. It has specific actions from Selenium, which can be incorporated to any application. So having this kind of utility is very important because this is what it is which makes your framework independent for any kind of application. So I've included some utilities for doing actions on any kind of application. Then there is an explicit wait for adding a wait scenario for a particular web element. Then there is a screenshot utility which will take screenshot on the failure of your particular test case, and there is a WebDriver instance utility which would return me the driver object for a particular browser. Then there is a component for adding test cases. As you can see, I'm calling the page objects into my test cases, and the assertion part is always performed in your test case. So these page objects, and when I call these functions, these are basically reusable functions which can be called into any test case. Later, we have something for suit execution, wherein I have included the file for suite execution, as you can see. So in this way, we can create modular as well as data-driven kind of approach for our test case. So this is a sample for hybrid-driven framework. So if I want, I can execute this particular login scenario just as a sample. So any more questions you would like to ask before we wrap up our today's session?
Ravi, I have a doubt.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Can you explain about promises for protractor framework? Because currently I'm not migrating
Yes.
to promises.
Okay.
So it's based on behavior-driven framework.
Yeah.
So
So you are using Cucumber with Protractor, right?
I'm using protractor framework for AngularJS applications.
Yes. So promises, when you talk about Protractor, it is basically a JavaScript Node.js plugin. So promises are something which is returned by the JavaScript. So if you call a particular function, you create a particular function, when you execute Node.js, it basically expects